Well, hello everybody. My name is Eugenia Balseiro. I am an English teacher. I work at UTech. I am an IPAC graduate and I have been working at university for the last 4 years. I'm also a secondary school teacher. I also do some private tutoring. And at present, I am teaching 4 curricular courses at UTech and 2 short workshops for special programs, which give students extra credits they will need at university. So what is Play to Learn? Play to Learn is a 4-day workshop. And it aims at exposing students to the basics of the English language in a fun, highly motivating environment. And it focuses on encouraging students to move from word level to sentence level. So which were my goals when I was trying to design this workshop? I wanted students to have the chance to practice English in a highly motivating and non-threatening context. I also wanted them to gain confidence and interest in the use of their L2. As you may have realized from attending the workshop, these students have a very basic level of English, A1 and A2. It's the first time they have taken a university course. It's their first semester actually. So I would say that in my view, it's the first experience they have of English at university. Of course, they have had English at high school, but as a university student, it's their first time. And also, I wanted to feel that their language abilities at a certain level would grow stronger after they exit the workshop. Well, I also thought about some outcomes and more practical outcomes because my goals were like my general objectives, and my outcomes were what I really wanted them to live with at the end of the course. So I set myself 4 very practical outcomes. On the one hand, to identify vocabulary and vocabulary categories. That was actually the outcome for the first workshop. Number 2, to create simple sentences based on given input. That was also the outcome of the second workshop. Number 3, to create simple sentences in a more autonomous way. And that was the outcome that I thought for the third workshop and the fourth workshop. And also to work collaboratively to complete the tasks. All the activities that I planned for Play to Learn were done in groups. They were done in a collaborative way. So my idea was that students could count on each other to be able to produce better language. So what I took into account to design the course, and actually it's what I always take into account when I have to design my courses at UTech. You know that UTech has a very flexible curriculum, so we teachers have to propose the courses we would like to teach, provided they respect the level our students have. And we build the curriculum and we build the materials from scratch. So it's quite daunting at times, but it's also really challenging and really enriching. So if you're going to plan a course from scratch, you need to take several things into account. Number 1, the audience, and in this case, it was students who were taking their first semester at university. Their level, in this case, students were of an A1, A2 level. The allotted time, I just had 4 classes in the semester to organize this workshop, and each class was going to be of about 2 hours. Learning goals and objectives, what is it that I wanted my students to live with when they finish the workshop? The available resources that I had, and the assessment. How was I going to see that my students were actually learning something, if they were learning something, right? So all this course of Play to Learn has like a strong theoretical foundation on gamification. And in very broad terms, gamification is to use game-based mechanics, aesthetics, and game thinking to engage people, motivate action, promote learning, and solve problems. So when we apply gamification as a way to design a course, as a method, let's say, to approach course design, what we do is we take content that would be presented in a traditional way, in a traditional class, and we just rethink it and reframe it, adding game layers to re-signify this activity. Okay, so basically we keep the same content, okay, but we just apply like a game layer coat to the whole to the whole content, to the whole course. And the one of the most important ideas behind gamification is that learning does not need to be boring. So academic learning does not equal boring. So when we think about these game elements that we should apply if we're following this gamification technique, we think about goals, like having a clear goal, a narrative, feedback, points, participation, interaction, groups and collaboration, and challenge and competition. So all those are the game elements that you can borrow from games, because they are present in all type of games. It doesn't matter if you're talking about video games or board games. So we just borrow them from the game design field and we apply them to our courses. So apart from gamification, I always use the backward design to design my courses. And backward design is an approach to course design that helps you organize your curriculum in a more student-centered way. So the first thing that I take into account when I'm using backward design to design a course are the outcomes. What are the identified desired results? What is it that I want my students to do? What is it that I want my students to live with when they finish taking my course? Okay, that's like the first thing. So I always think about the last part of the process. That's what I take into account as my prime objective, let's say, when I'm designing a course with backward design. Secondly, I think about assessment. Okay, so now that I know that I want my students to do this, to exit my course with these abilities or with these skills, I need to think about how I'm going to assess that they have actually got to the place I wanted them to go, right? So I think I need to think about what the assessment is going to be, or what are the evaluation tools that I'm going to use to check that my students are actually reaching those outcomes. So I need to think what is going to be I need to determine what the acceptable evidence is going to be. And after I have thought about my objectives, my outcomes, and I have thought about my assessment, I start planning and designing all the meaningful learning experiences. So that's why it's backward. So first the outcomes, then the assessment, and the last part is to design the activities and the content that I'm going to be delivering students through those activities, right? And of course, all this process is permeated by different situational factors. For example, the audience, the curricular context, the delivery modality, right? So, but this is for me, it has proven very successful and very useful to think this way, because my main target is a student. So I get to design a course which has the student as a center part of the learning process. So when you design backwards, you start with the end in mind, and then you identify the learning outcomes. You decide how you want to assess them, and after that, you design the learning activities. Those are the steps that I usually follow. So when I plan my lesson, I always have with me like some guiding questions to help me in the process, and I decided to share them with you, and they might come in handy as well. Sorry about the bullet points. I have just realized that they are all one. So first of all, I think, what do I want my students to learn or to do? Then how am I going to realize my students are actually learning? Number 3, which is going to be the main learning task of my class? Because you know that every class has a major or a main learning task, okay? Which it doesn't mean that it's the most important task, okay? It's just the main learning task. And how can I help my students to complete the main learning task? Which pre-task do I need to design? So this is crucial, this is vital, especially in my view, when you're working with lower level students. So if you want your students to play a certain game, that would be my main learning task, I need to plan very carefully which are going to be the pre-tasks that are going to enable them to have the vocabulary and the grammar and the confidence to reach this main learning task with more motivation and feeling that they are better equipped. Number 5, what language level they have and what are they capable of doing at that level. And I think this is also paramount when you want to set realistic objectives. So first of all, take into account the level that they have and try to plan all the activities thinking about what they can do, right? If you set realistic goals, it's going to be very beneficial for both students and for you, because you're not going to feel frustrated saying, oh, they know nothing, they couldn't achieve what I was planning to, what I wanted them to achieve. And they are going to feel that they have actually moved somewhere. And the last one, how can I follow up on the main task? How does this class fit in my whole course design? Okay, you know that all lesson plans have a continuity. So how is it that I'm going to follow up on what I did? So I played this game, I prepared all these activities prior to the game. So what I'm going to do afterwards, like how does it connect to what I'm going to do afterwards or to my next class? And I always keep in mind proper scaffolding. So every single class should have proper scaffolding in my view. Okay, so if you're going, again I repeat, if you're going to plan a class based on a certain board game and you would like students to play in a sort of autonomous way, you need to help them get there. It's not going to happen magically. You need to scaffold and design prior activities that will little by little help them move where you want them to be. Realistic expectations as well. Don't expect your students to do much more than they can actually do. Like, be realistic in your desires and your wishes for the class. Don't set activities which are too far-fetched for them. It's not good for you, it's not good for them. Both of them are going to end up being frustrated. And I also think about a progression from a more controlled practice to a more autonomous practice. So I took that principle as a basis of my whole course, and I also take that principle into account every time I have to plan one of the classes. So for example, in Play to Learn, right, in the whole course, there was a progression from session 1, where students just worked at word level and it was really controlled practice. Session 2, they had to start working at sentence level and the activity was quite controlled as well. In session 3, okay, they started working at sentence level based on various inputs, okay? So it was not just based on single word input as session 2, but now they had sentences, they had paragraphs, and I wanted them to be producing sentences at a more autonomous level. If you think about the progression I was talking about within one of the sessions, if you think about session 3, there is also a progression. If you check yes, point number 5, that was my main task. So I wanted my students to be able to play a board game on their own in a more autonomous way, in pairs. So I designed 4 tasks to help them get there. So number 1, it was just a pre-task of general vocabulary revision about games. In task 2, students had to read an input, okay, of 1 sentence, come to their group, and the whole group was going to be able to engage in sentence production, but it was just at a single sentence production. Number 3, the running dictation. Now the input is a little bit more complex because it's a paragraph and the sentence production keeps on being in groups. However, there is a less controlled practice because students are going to read one of the sentences from the paragraph, they're going to come to their groups, and maybe the group, if they feel that the sentence is not that good, they're going to make some tweaks to it. So there is a little bit more of production. In number 4, the input was visual, but there was a lot of sentence production in groups, just based on a visual input. And then students were also going to engage, students also engaged in sentence correction in groups. So they corrected each other's sentences. And in number 5, well, ideally, when they reached this task, they were a little bit more prepared than before to be playing on their own and to be producing sentences on their own and in pairs. Not individually, not in groups, but in pairs. So, a friend of mine always says, a well-planned class should feel more like a stroll in the park and less like a water rafting adventure. And I think that you reach this with careful planning, with proper scaffolding, with realistic objectives. Now it's your turn. So if you're a second grade student, we agreed with Florencia that this was going to be your task. So your task for our next encounter, which is going to be Wednesday the 5th of June from 8 to 10 p.m., is to design and deliver a short lesson in pairs or individually. That's totally up to you and also up to Florencia to see how she wants to organize the activity, following the framework of play to learn, which is based on board games and based on games. You will deliver the class you plan at UTech on Wednesday the 5th from 8 to 10. So the materials I would like you to use can all be found in that link. Okay, there you have a lot of board games. So you're going to choose, you or the pair who is going to be working together is going to choose one of those board games, and you're going to design a 30-minute lesson to deliver with my students, okay, at UTech. Extra materials that you will have at UTech: laptop, TV, and internet connection. So the audience that you have to take into account, 9 students at an A1 and A2 level. The goal is to encourage students to produce sentences in a more autonomous way. So the last thing that they did was the 3rd session of Play to Learn, in which they ended up playing a board game in pairs. You have 30 minutes to deliver, prepare, play the board game. Like, each person or each pair is going to have 30 minutes maximum. And what I would like you to show is proper scaffolding, game elements embedded in your course, in your class design, and realistic and attainable objectives. If you are a 4th grade student, you're going to design and deliver a short lesson individually, following the framework of Play to Learn based on board game, and you will deliver the class you planned in one of the English courses you're currently teaching. Same materials as 2nd graders. The audience, I just wrote to be determined because it depends on your class. The goal is to encourage students to produce sentences in a more autonomous way. Time allotted to be determined, because again, it depends on the class that you're teaching. And you must show proper scaffolding, game elements, realistic and attainable objectives. I think that Florencia is going to correct the lesson plan, and she will then do a follow-up on the class that you taught based on the Play to Learn framework. So thank you very much for watching the presentation and for listening to it as well. I'm going to email Florencia the PowerPoint just in case you need it. And if you need any help, I am more than happy to lend you a hand in anything that you need. Florencia has my email, so just feel free to email me in case you have any questions. And well, I hope to see you around very soon. Thank you very much.